It all starts with Steve, whose life was ordinary, maybe too ordinary. He spent his days selling doorknobs, which was a far cry from the adventures he'd once dreamed of. Because as a kid, all he ever wanted was to be a miner, to dig into the earth and discover what lay beneath. But life had other plans. That was until the day everything changed. Fed up with his mundane job, Steve decided to ditch the doorknob sales one day and set off for the very thing he had always wanted, the mine. The same mine he had been blocked from as a child by that grumpy old man. But now, nothing was going to stop him. Once there, Steve began digging, and as he did, he uncovered two strange artifacts, one a shimmering crystal cube, the other a mysterious creation cube. The moment the two cubes came together, a glowing portal pulled Steve into a whole new world. In a matter of minutes, Steve found himself in Minecraft, a place where his childhood dream of mining, exploring, and building could come to life. The land was made of blocks with endless possibilities, and with his new companion, Dennis the Wolf, Steve started shaping this new world, building homes and discovering all kinds of wonders. But soon, his journey took a darker turn. While exploring, Steve uncovered an ancient ruin that led him to the Nether, a dark, twisted world ruled by the evil sorceress Malgosha. Obsessed with the power of the creation cube, Malgosha wanted to use it to conquer every world. But Steve, determined to protect the cube, fought back and managed to escape, entrusting Dennis, the wolf he had tamed along the way, with the mission to hide the powerful artifact back on Earth, safe from the sorceress's grasp. And speaking of Malgosha, her journey was one of bitterness and vengeance. Once a hopeful dancer, she was rejected and mocked by everyone around her, including her own father. And the pain and shame of being laughed at hardened her heart, turning her into a cruel sorceress with one obsession, the creation cube. This artifact had the power to reshape worlds, and Malgosha wanted it more than anything, but it wasn't hers yet. The cube was hidden away, safe and sound under Steve's waterbed, thanks to Dennis. It had been entrusted with guarding it, knowing that as long as it remained hidden, all would be safe. That was until Garrett's life fell apart. Garrett Garrison had once been the face of an entire arcade generation, known across the country as the Trash Man. He had a talent no one could match. Throwing garbage with such perfect aim, he turned it into a video game empire. At just 21, he had the fame, the fortune, and $1 million contract to prove it. But nothing lasts forever. Out of nowhere, an eviction notice landed on his doorstep. The fans moved on, the money dried up, and Garrett, once on top of the world, now found himself at the very bottom of it. With no job, no savings, and nothing left to lose, he made one last move. He showed up at a local auction. The plan was simple: buy something cheap, flip it fast, and stay afloat for a little while longer. While walking around, a staff member pulled him aside and mentioned a strange old artifact locked inside a wooden box. Garrett, skeptical but curious, asked for a better price and a closer look. Eventually, he closed the deal at $900 with a promise to pay it off in 6 months, not knowing he would be disappointed at first, but not for long. Someone nearby, overhearing his complaints, simply told him this: maybe it was time to stop chasing buried treasure in places that smelled like mildew and regret. But Garrett didn't listen. He couldn't let go, because even if he didn't know it yet, his story was just getting started. On the other hand, Henry and his older sister Natalie had only just moved to the city. After losing their mom, it was the best fresh start they could find. Natalie picked up a job that paid just enough to keep the lights on, and the two settled into a small but decent apartment. When they arrived, they were met by Dawn, the real estate agent. Bright smile, kind voice, and a warmth that made the place feel a little less empty. The next morning, Natalie made breakfast for Henry and his new classmates. She even slipped him a little bottle of cologne, saying it was just to help him feel a bit more grown up. But Henry, still buried under the weight of everything they'd lost, grabbed the pizza, mumbled a half-hearted thanks, and left for school. A few blocks over, Garrett was clearing out his cluttered shop when Henry wandered in. The kid held up a slice of pizza and asked for some advice, something to help him face his first day. Garrett never wanted to pass up a chance to be dramatic. Called himself the salesman of life. He even told the kid his wisdom would cost $50 an hour. But then he said something that stuck. Friends are like puzzles. Sometimes you're just missing one piece. And you can't be a team by yourself. But with the right person, you can beat anything. Henry nodded, left the pizza behind, and walked into the school with a little more hope than before. Inside, the principal handed him his name tag. Seemed normal, until she suddenly confessed her marriage had been dead for years, but they stuck together for the sake of their dogs. His new teacher greeted everyone with a speech about how much he hated his life, muttering through sarcasm and caffeine. And their first task was a group project. One moment, Henry was trying to help. The next, he placed a part wrong, and their jetpack prototype blasted off the table. Across town, Natalie was at work, until the same jetpack came crashing through the window. The principal lost it and demanded to speak to Henry's guardian immediately. In a panic, Henry called Garrett and begged him to pretend to be his uncle. The moment Garrett heard he'd be paid $26, he was in. Back at the shop, Garrett tried to smooth things over with the principal. But while they talked, Henry noticed something odd sitting in the back of the store. That strange old cube. Garrett barely gave it a glance and said he was flipping it for $95. Then they found a manual buried in a dusty box. Do not combine the orb and the crystal cube, ever. Not even if you're broke and hoping it's full of treasure. Naturally, that made them want to open it even more. So they grabbed the cube and went to the only place they thought might hold answers, an abandoned mine just outside the city. They didn't know what they were looking for, just that something about it felt bigger than both of them. Meanwhile, Natalie came home and found Henry gone. Worried, she reached out to Don, the only person in the city who had ever offered real help. Don used a tracking app and found his location. What they saw when they arrived wasn't just a kid exploring a cave. It was a doorway. And before they could even react, the cube pulled them. They found themselves in the overworld, a vast, blocky, and pixelated landscape. Garrett, still processing everything, introduced himself as a gaming legend from back in '89. Before anyone could respond, a pink sheep appeared out of nowhere, staring at them with curiosity. And while they were busy looking at sheep, a villager who had witnessed the portal open entered it. And just like that, a bizarre connection between Earth and this strange world had begun. Meanwhile, in the Nether, the piglins were losing their patience. They had been digging for what seemed like forever, but had found no gold. The ground beneath them was barren, and Malgosia, ever the cruel sorceress, was on a rampage, threatening to turn her own minions into juicy pork chops if they didn't strike gold soon. In the middle of her fury, something caught her attention, a signal from the portal. The orb's power was reactivating. Without hesitation, she made her way to Steve, still her prisoner. She knew Steve had been the one who stole the orb, and so she simply let him go with one condition. If Steve wanted to save his beloved wolf Dennis, he had to return what belonged to her. Back in the overworld, Garrett begged the pink sheep to give him a mission, anything to find gold and prove his worth. Then, out of nowhere, Dennis the wolf burst onto the scene. The pink sheep stepped back, startled, and for a moment there was a heavy silence. That silence didn't last long, and neither did the day. The moment the sun went down, hunter skeletons, giant spiders, zombies, and creepers crawled out of the darkness and started attacking the relentless force. The group scrambled to run for their lives, but Henry used his sharp mind to start building defenses with blocks to protect everyone. Garrett, on the other hand, hid in fear until a creeper exploded right next to him, leaving him dazed. His scream gave away his position, and soon, zombies were closing in on him. And just when things seemed hopeless, the rest of the group arrived just in time to save each other. But then, like a hero out of nowhere, Steve appeared. With incredible skill, he wiped out every enemy in his path. As the dust settled, the sun began to rise, and the zombies were burned up by the morning light. The battle was over, but their adventure was just beginning. Steve told them he had a mission. He was after the Orb of Dominion. He made them a deal. He'd help them get back to Earth, but only if he could keep the orb. Without the crystal cube, they couldn't return safely. So they'd either have to find the cube or figure out another way back. It was a choice they didn't have much time to think about. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the villager was suddenly hit by a jeep, and the driver was none other than the school principal. She was worried about the accident and clearly afraid of being sued. So, trying to cover up the situation, she quickly offered him dinner. Back in the overworld, the group made their way to a peaceful village where they were greeted by curious villagers. They met some new faces along the way: a legendary pig, a wise llama, and a giant iron golem who guarded the village. After a long journey, they settled in for a much-needed roast chicken meal. Steve, ever cautious, warned them that the chicken had been cooked over lava and was still sizzling hot. But Garrett, too proud to admit weakness, ignored the warning. He took a huge bite, powering through the pain just to save face in front of the others. Meanwhile, in the Nether, Malgosia was losing patience. Her plans had been failing, and the piglins were growing restless. In a fit of frustration, she summoned her strongest general, Chungus, the most powerful piglin in her army. She gave him a special talisman, a nether wart, to protect him and his troops from turning into zombified bacon. She ordered him to get the orb, no matter what it took. Back in the overworld, the group got access to Steve's inventory, a magical space filled with gadgets, tools, and all kinds of cool stuff, and the Ender Pearl, a powerful item that could teleport you wherever you threw it. Garrett, of course, used it immediately, not realizing it was their last one. Afterward, Steve showed them how to craft tools from materials found in this world. Later, Garrett pulled Steve aside for a chat and admitted he had read the note hidden inside the orb. He asked straight up about the rumored treasure. Steve said he had a stash of diamonds, but they were deep in the mines, far from the mansion, and getting to them would be risky. But Garrett looked Steve dead in the eye and said, "No diamonds, no orb." So they set off for the mines. Just as they were about to leave, the piglins arrived. General Chungus introduced himself to Steve, polite but with a dangerous tone. While Steve tried to take charge, Garrett, craving some spotlight, jumped in. Armed with his goofy DIY weapon, he charged at Chungus, only to miss entirely and smack Steve instead. Chaos broke out and everyone split up during the fight. Natalie and Don ended up in one group while Garrett and Henry got separated. Before they parted ways, they agreed to meet up at the mansion. To help them escape, Steve handed out special flight wings, but there were only 2 pairs. In a surprising move, he tackled Garrett and took off with him, dodged sharp attacks, and performed wild stunts to outrun the piglin army. Eventually, Garrett and Steve activated their water drop mode, splashing down into a lake. Back on Earth, the principal was having an unexpected dinner date with the villager she had hit with her Jeep. Over dinner, she opened up about her recent divorce, admitting that her ex-husband just didn't have a personality. In the overworld, Steve was conflicted. He needed the orb to save his wolf, Dennis, still trapped in the clutches of Malgosha in the Nether. And speaking of Nether, Malgosha was seething with anger after Chungus's failure. With no more patience, she unleashed her ultimate weapon, the Great Pig. This monstrous beast, newly implanted with a brain, erupted to life and crushed General Chungus. Malgosha, giving out her first command, ordered him to bring the orb. Now back in the overworld, Natalie and Dawn came face to face with Dennis. Recognizing him, Dawn offered him a bone. The wolf, touched by the gesture, allowed them to approach. Knowing that Dennis belonged to Steve, they decided to follow him, hoping he'd lead them straight to the rest of the group. Meanwhile, deep underground, Steve and the others reached the area where the diamonds were hidden. Just as they were about to celebrate, Steve smelled something unmistakable. The foul scent of netherwort. Without a second to lose, Steve motioned for the others to follow him. They jumped into the minecarts and sped off, but just as they gained momentum, the redstone that powered the tracks ran out, and the carts screeched to a halt, right in front of their creeper farm. And then the Great Pig appeared. With no other option, Steve and Garrett triggered the creepers. The explosion that followed tore through the mine. When the smoke finally cleared, they had made it out. Back at the surface, Henry was furious about losing the diamonds and snapped at Garrett. Garrett, feeling the weight of his failure, shot back, saying, "I need those diamonds. It's the only way I stop being broke. You wouldn't understand. You're just a kid." At that moment, Henry confessed that he might be a kid, but he's his friend. And he's not alone. Forming a new understanding, they began to plot their next move. A heist to take the mansion, reclaim the orb, and face whatever came next. Now, according to Steve, the mansion was no ordinary place. The first floor was guarded by tough villagers who were always ready for battle. The second floor was controlled by dark, sinister evokers who could summon nightmares with just a flick of their hands. And the top floor is where the Enderman crystal was, and it was protected by Endermen, creatures that could kill with just a glance. Before they could make their move, the villagers ambushed the adults, dragging them into an underground fight club. Steve, staying out of sight, watched from the shadows. Garrett was shoved into the ring, forced to face a tiny zombie rider on a bloodthirsty chicken. While it looked ridiculous, the little zombie fought like a demon, so Garrett had no choice but to fight back. Meanwhile, Henry sneaked his way to the third floor. Henry grabbed his diamond sword and charged and eventually won. His reward was the teleportation sphere, an item that could transport him across the overworld, maybe even further. Exhausted, the group tried to escape the mansion, but Malgosha had tracked them down using the orb's magical scent. With a wicked grin, she took both the creation cube and the Enderman crystal, vanishing into the shadows of the Nether. Devastated, Steve and Henry were ready to give up, but Garrett wasn't done. He set off a massive explosion to stop Malgosha from finishing them off. The shockwave was enough to send everyone flying. The boys, bruised and barely conscious, landed among the rubble. Moments later, Dennis the wolf found Steve and nudged him awake. Slowly, Steve got to his feet. In the distance, Henry was hurt. Amid the destruction, they noticed something strange. A cozy little mushroom house. Dawn had built it as a quick shelter. Reunited with Natalie and Dawn, the group took a hard look at what was happening. Malgosha's power was growing, and the darkness was spreading across the overworld. The world was at risk, and this was the only time to fight back. With new resolve, they began crafting stronger tools. Henry, holding the teleportation sphere, worked on upgrading the iron golems by giving them super speed modules. Now, they had an army of iron giants ready to take on whatever came next. Malgosha saw the heroes coming from a distance and laughed at the sight. Golems wouldn't fight unless provoked, but one impulsive piglin threw the first punch, and that was enough for the golems to snap into action. Enraged, Malgosha summoned the Great Pig, but the heroes had their own surprise, an even bigger, stronger golem made from a secret alloy. While these two massive beasts collided, Steve faced Malgosha directly. He was fully armored in hand-carved diamond plates and wielding a massive diamond blade. But Malgosha didn't flinch, as she knew her dark magic could overpower any blade. Meanwhile, Henry fought his way toward the Orb of Dominion, determined to end this once and for all. Natalie, separated from the group, found herself alone. Then the Great Pig broke free from its battle with the golem and charged right toward her. With nowhere to run, Natalie braced for impact, but just in time, Dawn appeared, and she was surrounded by a pack of wild wolves she had tamed. With one sharp whistle, the wolves launched themselves at the Great Pig, creating a chaotic brawl. Amid the chaos, the Great Pig took a deadly hit at Henry. But just when they thought it was over, Garrett emerged, rising from the ashes like a phoenix. He rushed to Henry, pulled him to safety, and with what little strength they had left, the group regrouped. Together, they tore apart Malgosha's dark machinery and threw the Orb of Dominion into the abyss. For a moment, the world seemed to breathe again as light filled the air and balance returned to the overworld. But just as the orb was about to disappear, the Great Pig grabbed it. Then in one final act, the ultimate golem slammed into the Great Pig, knocking it down and reclaiming the orb once and for all. With the orb now in their possession, Steve stepped forward to face Malgosha. While she was weak, cornered, and defeated, Steve looked her dead in the eyes and said, "It's over. You lost." But even then, Malgosha lunged at him with a hidden knife 3 times, and Steve blocked her attack each time. But instead of finishing her off, Steve turned away and walked off, leaving her to live with the shame of her failure. With the battle over, Steve gathered the crew one last time. He turned to Henry, offering him a chance to stay in the overworld and start fresh. But Henry shook his head and decided he was going home. Steve then knelt beside Dennis, his loyal wolf, and surprised everyone by handing the leash to Dawn. He gave Garrett a tight hug, calling him a true friend and a brave warrior, and thanked Natalie and Dawn for their bravery. One by one, they all walked through the portal to Earth. Back on Earth, everything had changed. Garrett had leveled up. His shop was now the hottest spot in town, and with his friends, he launched a new video game based on their crazy adventure. Dawn had left her real estate job behind. With Dennis by her side, they were a team, bringing the fun wherever they went. Natalie, now a local hero, had opened her own self-defense school. She was a community icon, respected by everyone, and Henry had finally fixed that jetpack, flying through the skies and living his dream. But wait, the story isn't quite over yet. Cue the post-credit scene. Turns out love had blossomed between the villager and the school principal. After a lot of ups and downs, the villager had learned to be a fluent human, and the principal had picked up some villager language along the way. And to my surprise, the villager took her hand, got down on one knee, and proposed. So that's how the story ends, or does it? What do you think? Does the Minecraft movie meet your expectations? Was it worth the wait? Let us know in the comments.